Dunedin City Council, and for the first time I've realised that we have new microphones and new speakers, and they certainly do resonate. Our prayer today is being led by Sheikh Azra Haq, the Imam of the Al Huda Mosque in Dunedin. Welcome, Imam.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. In the name of God, the entirely merciful, especially merciful. All praise is due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful, owner of the day of judgment. It is you we worship alone, and you we ask for help. Guide us to the straight path, the path of those upon whom you have bestowed favors, not of those whom have evoked your anger, or of those who are astray. And peace, blessing, and mercy of God befall on you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, councillors, as usual, we will start with public forum. Janet Hoek. Janet Hoek, is she here yet? No, she's not. So we'll move on to the next one. Peter Dowd of the Bus Users Support Group. Welcome, Peter. You may need to check if that microphone's on.
It is now, yes. Voice activated, I think. It's rather clever.
Fine.
So, Your Worship and Councillors, good afternoon. So I'm here to suggest and remind the Council of its previously stated consideration of taking over the governance of Dunedin's public transport service. So there is a visual aid to this. All the things on this page are jumbled together, which pushes them into the same context. That wasn't the intention, but I think it will still help. So I'm not going to read out the text on the left. I just put that there just to demonstrate that things have been dragging on a bit for quite good reasons. The City Council and the Regional Council had agreed to, while considering the idea favourably, not to proceed. That was the correct decision, in my opinion, with a lot of upheaval in the public transport service, with some implementation of a completely new way of running it, introduction of a bus hub, tendering of all of the services. It was quite appropriate for the City Council to not get involved. But now, almost all of the bus routes have been re-tendered into very long-term contracts. There is a good decade or so of stability ahead. The bus hub is all but ready to go. They're just about to bring out the orange diggers and break the asphalt and get cracking with that. There could not be a better time for the City Council to put its hand up, stop the bus and get on that bus. I want to commend that to you. I'm not going to give you a comprehensive list of the reasons why you should do that. I think that members of this council have already given thought to that. But my first graphic visual aid is is this picture here. It's a bit incomprehensible, but that shows the front step of a bus, the responsibility of the regional council, and in the foreground, a footpath, the responsibility of the city council. I feel that with both of those pieces of infrastructure being maintained or under the responsibility of only one organisation, you'll get a better compatibility. And in that London Underground expression, mind the gap, I think you'll find that your ratepayers and citizens do mind the gap quite a lot, and if you could make it smaller, they will appreciate it. So that's just an example of what we're talking about here. Moving on to the next image, it's another gap. It's a gap between, it's actually rather hard to see, a gap between the community house that leads through to Great King Street and with the police station in the background. This is a gap that has been sort of missed out on because of a lack. The bus hub is going to go ahead, and this gap is going to get a wall built across it. The regional council is going to build a wall and perhaps make Mexico pay for it, instead of letting people walk through this gap as they have been for many years. It's a shame because it's a city council-owned land. With the bus hub being designed from a much wider, holistic, all-of-city point of view, this might not have happened, but, well, walls can be demolished. And so the other thing to consider is that now that Dunedin's bus network stretches as far away as Palmerston, and moving on to the third picture, some of you might think, well, that would be strange to be running a bus service into the Waitaki district, and so maybe it wouldn't be appropriate. Well, all I can say is here, in 1926, there's a picture of a Dunedin City Corporation bus service that the city used to operate to Fairfield, which I think was sort of the Palmerston equivalent of those days, well outside the city boundary, but a extension of the city's enterprise, if you like, well beyond the city boundary. And as you know, at the similar periods of the city's history, they were extending, the waterworks out and hydro works to places like Waipori, and so at the time this wasn't deemed inappropriate. I think we could live with a city-governed bus service running to Palmerston if in 1926 they didn't mind running one to and from Fairfield. And then this only leaves the last picture, perhaps the most important consideration of all is if the City Council did contract and govern the bus service, what colour should the buses be painted? And this is a suggestion. Not me coming to tell you that Dunedin needs a tram service. I'll leave that up to other people. So, are there any questions?
Questions, councillors? Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Dowden, and timely given the impending rollout of the Regional Council's final tranche of public transport services, maps and timetables on the 18th of September. But with regards to your question around governance, of the public transport system, which I have some sympathy for, I'm wondering if we could get clarification from the Chief Executive. My understanding is that there is legislation in the way of us being able to do that at present, and whether we're aware or whether we could get staff to investigate any efforts that were going on in other districts to either change that legislation or find ways around that, so that we could look at giving effect to our joint consultation with the Regional Council that we put forward at the annual plan.
Yes, so there is legislation that stands in the way of it. A similar transfer of responsibility was looked at in Christchurch. It was requested by both councils in Christchurch, but the eventual agreement of all legal opinions was that it was unable to take place, that the Land Transport Act, that there is no provision for delegation of responsibility. The council could take responsibility for things like tendering for the bus operators, for example, although we actually have some long-term tenders in place at the moment, but the Regional Council cannot delegate to us the strategic function, which is the function that the City Council is perhaps more interested in. So fare box recovery, routes, timetables, the relative share. There are some ways of potentially working more closely together, and Some discussions have been had with the Regional Council around, for example, joint consultation, joint community engagement. They received that suggestion very positively. In terms of what's been done about this and whether anybody's seeking to overturn it, I don't know. I don't think Christchurch are following up, but we have made an approach to the Department of Internal Affairs. They are responsible for the Local Government Act change that suggested that the Section 17A reviews on shared services should happen, and Internal Affairs said if any council can come up with any other laws that need to be changed in order to facilitate different distribution of responsibilities between councils, let them know, and they would look at what they could do. So we have advised them about this.
Councillor O'Malley.
I suspect the CEO has actually just answered almost the question I was going to ask, but would you, Mr Dowden, like to see the council be more proactive in getting some of these laws that are based in Parliament changed so that we can take on this role that you're suggesting?
That's a very interesting question, and if I drew you to the left-hand side of my visual aid, down the bottom there, it just points out. It's in summary, but in fact, none of these considerations appear to have hampered the Queenstown Lakes District Council in taking quite a leading role in the bus service in Queenstown. So I believe that it is quite explicitly a joint arrangement in Queenstown. But I'll leave that up to you, whether you think a joint arrangement with the ORC would be sufficient to improve the City Council's influence over the running of the bus service. But yes, I'm not as familiar as the Chief Executive with the legal considerations, and I have no reason to doubt her take on the situation. But yes, there does seem to be some wiggle room if you look at the Queenstown case, and it was my intention in putting that sort of little list on here just to indicate that Queenstown has turned around this same concept of the service being governed at a much more local level, turned it around in about a 12-month period. It's actually going to be implemented in November, and my understanding is that Queenstown District ratepayers' money will be put into their system. So it's rather interesting that if rather than just a couple of councillors turning up to some sort of regional council transport subcommittee and having their say, I think that if money follows them, it actually gives a very clear indication of what's going on. And yes, people other than me ought to make further investigations into the Queenstown system, because I don't fully understand it myself, but I understand that money is changing hands. It doesn't matter if a ratepayer pays 2 bus levies on their rates that are half as much, that are split 2 ways between 2 councils and then joined up again at the other end. But it does give each council in the Queenstown model perhaps more mana when they each bring money into the mix.
It's worth knowing that what part of what's happened in Queenstown is that Queenstown is stumping up a whole lot of new money for public transport input. So it's not just a matter of exactly the same funding divvied up 2 ways. They're getting lower fare box, and we could do that too. We could say we wanted to reduce the fare box recovery for the regional council, and that would mean we would rate for that. So if we were willing to give them an extra $3 per bus ride, rated to our ratepayers, they would be willing to drop their bus fares. That's what Queenstown have done. So it's not a different form of sharing. Queenstown have headed extra money into the mix in order to reduce their bus fares, and they're working on a collaborative model, which is exactly the one that we've proposed.
Okay. Further questions, councillors? Run on. Mr Dowden, thank you very much. Next speaker is Robert Kennedy, who wishes to speak to us about freedom camping. Mr Kennedy, welcome.
I'd like to talk about freedom camping with 9 self-contained cars and vans. Right, the Council Committee considering this problem is recommending banning non-self-contained vehicles parking overnight on council-controlled grounds. At the hearing last week, 90% of the speakers were advocating more areas to alleviate the problem. Of these speakers, 5 were members of community boards. They're at the coalface dealing with this problem on behalf of their communities. To a person, along with other speakers, they believe this ban will drive these overnighters back to the bushes. To enforce this prohibition is almost impossible given the DCC boundaries. The cost is something else again. These people are coming whether you like it or not. There are businesses and areas in Dunedin that have properties that are underutilised. I'm not suggesting it's the council's responsibility, but somehow an approach needs to be made to these owners to provide parking at a small charge. Local Government New Zealand is one step down from the government. It has been dithering with this New Zealand-wide problem, non-self-contained vehicles overnighting, for 5 years. The inability of councils to levy a charge for services irritates ratepayers everywhere in our beautiful country. Your Worship, and now Chair of the local body New Zealand, I would urge you to make this specific problem in the Act an early priority in your tenure. I believe it's been discussed at various times. Interesting to note, in the paper yesterday, Mr English made a comment in Queenstown, the hotspot. I couldn't help smile a little bit. He's advocating non-self-contained vehicles to park less than 200 metres from a toilet. I couldn't help but think about Baldwin Street. That'd be the most expensive toilet in the country, and they'd have a right to it if he made that sort of a law. That's just a side. Thank you, Mr Chairman, councillors.
You happy to take questions?
I'm very happy to take them.
Questions, councillors? There are none. Thank you very much, Mr Kennedy.
Thank you very much for your time.
Cheers. But our next speaker is Rosemary Penwarden, who wishes to speak to us about the climate declaration. Welcome, Rosemary. And welcome, Ralph.
Did she give them to?
Yes, it has.
Oh, good. Everybody got. Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. And I'm Rosemary Penwarden. Dunedin has been my home for 29 years, and I don't ever want to live anywhere else. And I want to say thank you to all of you, because what you're doing is a very important job, and it takes a certain civic mindedness and a certain community mindedness to want to do a job like this. And these are qualities that are so much needed for the future. We all love this city, and we want to protect it, and we want to make it a better place. So you've all each been trusted by us to do this crucial job. I'm hearing this race against time to adapt and mitigate the worst of climate change being called the Great Transformation. I quite like that. A great transformation happened in my life in 2011 when I became a grandma, and that spurred me into working on climate change. We can sort of fast forward up until about 2 years ago when myself and 11 or 12 other individuals from around the country got together and wrote this declaration. It's a kind of line in the sand. It's a kind of people's picture of what our country could look like and a kind of rough blueprint of how we could get there. It's an invitation to every person, whether you're from Māori Hill, South Dunedin, whether you're a university person or whether you're unemployed, to be part of this great transformation. It's a rebuild, and not just a rebuild in infrastructure. Goodness knows we know there's a lot of that to do. Most of all, it's a rebuild of our values, of making a choice to put people before profit, respect for human rights and for the natural world, economic fairness, kindness. How do you make a zero carbon economy by 2050? Seems like pie in the sky. It's not, because we have no choice, and the sooner we roll up our sleeves and get going, the better. I like to use my friend Bob Lloyd's words. You might know Bob, who used to run the energy department at the university. Our society is pathologically ill. It's suffering from uncontrolled growth. And the treatment regime involves 3 parts: reduce inequality, change the economic system away from uncontrolled growth, and halt the vested interests that are keeping it going in business as usual. People are starting to see around the world that cities like ours have an amazing opportunity to show the way, even when their central governments are dragging the chain. Of course, we've seen that in the United States. We just happen, we could call it lucky, to have the largest scale problem in the country right here regarding sea level rise, and that's, I won't need to remind you anything about that, but this is our big opportunity. All eyes on Dunedin. This declaration contains Bob's treatment regime. Every one of those things goes hand in hand. For Dunedin, transport is a big one. We know that about 75% of our greenhouse gas emissions are from petrol and diesel. We're really pleased, and it's wonderful to see electric cars growing exponentially, but does that help our inequality problem? What about e-car share? And I think even better still, and it was great hearing Peter just before us, electric public transport. And more than that, free or very heavily subsidised. What a transformation that would have in our city. And it would be the quickest and easiest way to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Safe cycle lanes, as we know, the successful ones overseas, are completely separated from cars and trucks. It is a matter of priority. If we continue at the current rate of global warming, we are likely to hit 2 degrees at around 2034, when my grandson turns 23 and my granddaughter will be 17. It's almost too scary to let this sink in. But I can't think of a more useful place for a grandmother to be, but on the front lines of this great transformation. I can remember, it's 2015, when sitting in the packed Glenroy auditorium, when, as a city, we told our government that we wanted stronger action in Paris. I'm sure many of you were there. It was a really powerful evening. There is enormous passion for change in our city. There's also skill and knowledge to do it. This declaration is a message that we can all be part of that change that's needed. And I guess, Ralph, and my important message today is that the people of the city are behind this great transformation, and we will back you, our leaders, to transform Dunedin into New Zealand's first zero carbon city. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you happy to take questions? And Ralph, are you going to present separately, and would you like to leave questions till after both of you, or?
Let's have them later.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillors, thank you. I'm Ralph Adler. I'm a professor of accounting at the University of Otago. Some of my research includes how organizations, their environmental practices, that is, and how they report on those practices. But I'm here today for 2 purposes. One is I want to inform you about our Climate Declaration Group. Secondly, I'd like to ask for your support. The Climate Declaration Group, we launched on the 18th of June throughout New Zealand. We launched in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, and Dunedin. The mayor was kindly at the launch, and we are a grassroots movement. We've seen what's happened over the last 40 years when international bodies, these are governments, try to get together and try to affect change that's needed. The progress has been very little. While I support those efforts, I also know we need something else, and that's at the grassroots level. And if you look around the world, you'll see that where change has occurred, it's occurred in these small sections of society, these small pockets. We can see parts of California where it's happened. We can see parts of the European Union. We can also see small cities here in New Zealand. Waitati is one example. So we're purposely a grassroots organization. A main pillar of what we're about is to become carbon neutral. And whether you believe or don't believe, I hope you're the former, at a minimum you should see this as an option. So I'm an accounting person, finance person, and this is a valuable option to take out. And for those who are not willing to, want to avoid the issue, you're not hedging your bets very well. The idea of this grassroots movement is that sections, just pieces of a neighborhood, will start to act, will do something, a thing. There are many things we need to do. I'm going to get into a couple of these, how we could do, and your support for these. And visualize it this way, that there's a small part of a community that's doing something. And there are other small parts of other communities that are doing something. As the initiatives grow in each of those parts, we'll see larger sections of that community, of that neighborhood, that will be doing things. And eventually we'll start to see connections between these, or previously unconnected sections of neighborhoods that were doing things. To the point that hopefully, and you're visualizing this still, we have a whole city. And Rosemary's already said this. This is a great chance for our city to be leaders, to do something that is needed. We do need to move to this carbon neutral society, and our city could be the one that leads. Support. What am I asking for? Don't worry, I'm not asking you to reach for your wallets. I'm asking you for your help in different ways. Each morning, I usually work in the morning before I head to the university, and I sit in my son's room, use that as my office, and I look out the window across the street to where there's a primary school. And I see cars after car arriving. And later on, when I walk my dog, I notice some of these cars because some of them have signage on them, and they're only 2 or 3 blocks away. So as Rosemary mentioned, transport. Transport, though, of school children. I can't believe this is what happens. I count maybe 10 students a day out of a school of 80 walk to school. The other 70 are being driven, and from not a very far distance. This is one school that has a similar problem, the problem I'm sure is similar to other schools. Okay, just one example, but throughout the city I'm sure we have something that's similar. The other thing I notice, we have a coal burner. We shouldn't have this. The school feels overwhelmed though. I've discussed this with the school, and again, they're like other schools. They don't know where to start. I would try to give them some help, but here's what I'm looking for, is your help too. We have over 30 schools that are burning coal. And I'm sure there are more than 30 schools throughout our city that are also having high vehicle movements to and from school. It's a similar problem. I'm asking for your help in terms of giving guidance to these schools. There are leaders out there from this climate declaration group that will do a lot of the hard lifting, but support would be useful. And that's what I'm asking for today. You'll notice that the climate declaration that you've been given there on the back side, there's actually placed a sign. By all means, I would love for you to share this with others and ask them to sign. But I'd also like to see the Dunedin City Council signature on there. I don't know why we can't have more than an individual signature, but have actually our city's endorsement of this. I end here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. Questions, councillors? Councillor O'Malley.
Thanks very much for coming and presenting today. Are you giving the same presentation to the Otago Regional Council? Because I think one of the issues we face is that many of the things you just mentioned, especially towards the end of your presentation, are more under their jurisdiction than under ours. And we talk a lot about cooperative behaviour, but I think for these things to come into place, they have to come together, and public presentations at both councils probably would help a lot in that regard.
Right, and I will be doing that. But I do think that it's, you know, if I am trying to encourage school children and their parents to walk to school, is that only the Otago Regional Councils? And I think you're talking about the idea of probably buses. But I'm talking about kids walking. It's 2 or 3 blocks. I can't see why you take a bus. What's stopping our kids from walking? You know, riding a bicycle, that's fine too, but these are things that I believe as a city of concerned citizens, and as Rosemary said, you are our leaders. We're hoping to see your leadership on this in terms of helping with the problem. And there is a problem. And the same thing when it comes to the coal. I can tell you, I've consulted for these schools. I was on a volunteer basis. I brought in true experts from Otago University to help with this. And the thing is, as you can imagine, if we do it on a grander scale, if instead of one school going it alone, 2 schools or 3 schools, we have savings right away. We save on things like the transportation costs, because a lot of the technology will have to come from perhaps a place in Europe for these burners, for something that's more sustainable. We can put it all into one container, at least if we only have, let's say, 2 or 3 schools we can do this with, 4 schools, whatever it might be. We can save on transportation costs. There's other costs we can also save on, though, if we tackle this, you know, in a combined manner. And so I'm hopeful that you'll see this opportunity too.
Further questions, councillors? None. Rosemary, Ralph, thank you very much for your presentation. Our next presenter is Dougal McGowan on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, who wishes to speak to us on the subject of Easter trading. Welcome, Dougal. Voice activated.
Your Worship and Councillors, it's a real privilege to be here today representing. Today's hat is the Chamber of Commerce, and that's a business organisation of 1,000 members throughout Otago. I'm here today to support a paper that you're going to be reviewing later on in the afternoon, and that is around the Easter trading. And we also support the recommendation that is in that paper. 2.5 years ago, we started to collect data on this issue around the Easter trading and what our members thought of Easter trading. And with the changes in legislations in 2016 to the Shop Hours Trading Act, that role was delegated to local council to form local policies. We think timing is important. And we now believe that it has become quite apparent that there is that need and want for the issue of Easter trading to be considered for consultation, and that would then lead into a local Easter trading policy. An important part of that is the timing, to be able to get that consultation done in time for the retailers and shop owners to be able to make the amendments that they need to in time for March next year. I'd like to quite clearly state that at this current stage, the Chamber is not for or against Sunday Easter trading. However, we are very much wanting to see that the consultation happens so we can make an informed decision, and would really like to be a help in creating that information to make a good decision.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Garrett.
Mr McGowan, I wonder if you would like to comment about your members' view of the ability or inability or agreement or disagreement of employees to work on Easter Sunday. It's all very well having a philosophy that I have to, but the reality is that it isn't always quite like that if you're trying to ensure you've got staff available. So I'd be interested in your members' view on that, please.
Yeah, so it's quite a complex part of the legislation, and there is quite sound law around the employment law that sits around that. That is outlined in the paper that is there very briefly. We haven't surveyed our members about that. We have talked at our retail committee about that as an issue. Most appear to say that if they have the time to be able to address that, then that would be suitable. But if they had a month or 2 weeks' notice, then that becomes very difficult. But that would be part of the consultation that we'd need to make sure that we understand that, because you don't want to have, let's say, all the shops open but no staff in them.
Any further questions, councillors? There are none. Mr McGowan, thank you very much. That was easy. Right, we'll move on now. That's the... Oh, Councillor Benson Pope.
That's not a bad thing. I'm wondering, though, about the climate declaration. I'm assuming that that's going to be referred to one of the committees for consideration, given that we had a direct request to sign up.
Yes, I think that would be appropriate. So we need to deal with each, figure out how we deal with each of the submissions, and it would be appropriate to direct that to, I think, Sandy will pick it up and direct it to the appropriate committee.